I'm Patrick Ogle for GearWire, and I am here to talk about the guitar, the final little chat about the Chicago School of Guitar Making's guitar maintenance and repair class, which I took. It's a 4-part class that met for like 2.5 hours on successive Saturdays. And we went over the various things we learned in the class each week. It was broken down into different sections where you would first learn about like the basic history of the guitar, and then you learned about the bridges and the nuts and the neck relief, and it went through it in a coherent fashion. You learned about pickups. You learned about the other electronics, and it was put together in a coherent fashion. And if nothing else, it's a great kind of history of the guitar and development of the guitar course. Now, after the first couple of classes, I was not entirely convinced I was going to be able to do anything with the guitar, especially since on the second class and in the second video we did on this, I noted that I had ruined a guitar, fortunately a very cheap guitar, by over-filing the saddle. So that made me a little bit nervous about fooling with any of the guitars I might actually play. For instance, this guitar, this Epiphone Dot. Not because it's less complicated, it probably is more complicated to deal with this one than... But there was nothing really wrong with it either. But there was, there were a couple of things that there was like a kind of, to me, I heard a buzzing. Ian Schneller, who teaches the course, really didn't hear it. And then when I'm sitting there and it's buzzing. And then he comes over and is playing it and it's like, there's no buzz. So, I don't know. Maybe it was my imagination. But anyway, so I did adjust the truss rod on this. And I think most people who will be watching this are aware. A truss rod is a rod in the center of the neck under the fretboard. There's a little hole right here. Some guitars, like old Fenders, and some new Fenders too, the truss rod's down here, and you have to take the neck off to get at it. Acoustic guitars, the truss rod will generally be in the hole. There's a hole here, and imagine this is acoustic. There's a hole. The truss rod will be in here. You reach in with a wrench here to adjust the truss rod, and it seemed to improve. I didn't hear any more buzz. I didn't fool with it too much. I was very cautious, taking off the little plate here, loosening the 2 center strings and moving them back over here so I could get in there with the Allen wrench, and making sure, really important to make sure the size of the wrench is right. Because obviously there are metric and then non-metric wrenches, and they generally go with where was the guitar made. If the guitar was made in America, it's probably not going to be metric, and vice versa. I don't know that as a hard, fast rule that all Mexican guitars have metric truss rods. I don't know that. It's possible they don't. So you want to be really sure that it fits right, because if it doesn't fit right, just imagine any kind of screw, any kind of wrench, and what happens when you use the wrong size. You screw things up. So don't do that. Make sure the wrench is right, and then don't go crazy and go and switch, and just because that's no good either. That could cause all kinds of problems. Don't be lazy. One of the reasons that the saddle in the acoustic guitar was ruined was because I was lazy. I filed it, and what I should have done was put it back in, put the strings back on, checked it. And if it was okay, it was okay. But instead I said, I'll file a little bit more off because I'm lazy and I don't want to fool with that. Don't do that. In this case, I did not do that. I tested it, did it a little bit, put the strings back on, checked it out. Still didn't seem quite right to me. Seemed like there was still a little bit of did it again. And so, did the whole process again. Don't over adjust it. Don't fool, and this guitar didn't need much done to it. That's the other thing, is that don't just do it for the hell of it. So that's really basically the lesson. And in the last class, I suddenly realized I can actually do this. I can actually adjust the truss rod on the guitar without ruining it. And if you do it, if you turn if you keep track of what you're doing, if you turn the truss rod, half a turn or and you put the strings back on and it sounds worse, well, you can always go back the other direction. Just do it cautiously, do it carefully. And I'm not going to say, some people are just really, mechanically inclined, and they can build anything and they can fix anything. If you're that kind of person, I think maybe you can, with a certain amount of education you pursue on your own, you can you could probably do this without the class, but most people, I think you're probably better off taking a class on this. Or, I've spoken to a number of people who are luthiers recently, and most of them, they didn't take classes per se. They went out to the pawn shop and bought a junky guitar, and they took it apart, and they fooled with it, and they fixed it, and they ruined it, and they went on to the next one. And then they started working someplace where they had an expert teach them. That's ideal, because I don't think you can really get a hell of a lot out of a 4-week class. You are not an expert, guitar maintenance guy because you went to this class. Unless you were pretty far along to begin with, that's not the case. But this class was a very good introduction. I would recommend it to anybody, especially people who've been playing for a long time who don't maintain their own instruments. And I would also especially recommend it to people who have a lot of players' instruments. If you have, a pre-war Martin and you want to take the neck off, and don't do that yourself. Have somebody who knows what they're doing do it. Even if it's a 60s guitar, don't do that. But if you have a lot of players' guitars, you've got 15 guitars, you're a working musician, but you don't really so much fool with it. If you're in Chicago, especially, or if you're going to be here for a month, take the class and fool with some of these guitars. You'll save yourself a bunch of money. If you have 15 guitars you need to have set up, just basic setups, that's going to cost you, minimum $600 a year, minimum. And the class is like about $250. So I think I've rambled on quite enough about this. But Chicago School of Guitar Making, also they make specimen guitars in Chicago. And they offer a bunch of different classes. They have fretting classes for the more advanced people. They have electronics classes. They have tube amp building classes, et cetera, et cetera. So you can check their website out and you can go look into that. But you can also look for your own skill level. And I think this class is a good, if nothing else, it kind of will tell you where your skill level is. If you go through this whole class and you're like, I know all this, then you need to, kind of, go higher up the food chain on the classes. Also, if you call them and talk to them about where you're at and what you're interested in, I think they'll be more than happy to direct you to the appropriate class. People have asked about classes go elsewhere. Somebody sent an email about, are they going to come to England and do a class? You'd have to ask them, but I doubt it. Anyway, that's it. Done.